Hi, so in this video we're going to talk about some of the basic circular functions that we can define on the unit circle. And one of them ought to be quite familiar to us at this point, and the other one is just an analog of it. So when we looked at circular functions before, we were just taking circles anywhere in the Cartesian plane and we were just looking at the heights of the circle as we traversed around them. And so with the unit circle, that's not really going to be much different. So we're starting right at the at 1 0 here, right? And then as we traverse along the circle, uh, some amount t, that's going to be the distance traveled along the arc or the edge of the circle. And what we've previously been looking at is it's just the height function here, right? The height at which you are after you've traversed t units. So we're formally going to give this thing the name in this case. This height function is going to be sine of t, right? And what it is going to be, it's going to measure how high up or down you are on the unit circle after you traverse t units, right? So it start at 0, and then it will go up to 1, and then it will come back down to 0, go down to -1, come back up to 0, and then repeat itself, right? And this is more or less the circular function that we've been looking at, or its variants. Its sort of dual concept is something called the cosine. And the cosine is just, well, instead of measuring how far up and down we're going, we can measure how far forward or back we're going. So if I took if I drop the line down here and I measure how far forward we've gone forward, this would measure cosine of t. So cosine of t is how far either forward if it's positive, or back the other way if you're negative, that your position is after traversing, again, t units, right? So cosine of t would start at 1, it would go up to 0, it would come down to -1, it would come down, or -1, it would go back down to 0, right? Because we've not moved forward or back, and then it will go back to 1. And so perhaps an easy way of trying to think about cosine and sine in terms that are familiar is, well, how far forward and back you go on a function. This is the x-axis, right? This is our x values in the typical Cartesian plane tend to measure, right, distance forward or distance back from the origin. And our y values typically measure our heights relative to the origin, right? How much up or how much down. And so one way to think about both cosine and sine is as the coordinates cosine of t, sine of t, as you traverse around the circle. So whatever distance you travel, if I go out here, then that coordinates positions would now be cosine t, sine of t, and we note that our cosine will be negative because we're now to the left of the origin. Our sine would be positive because we're still above the origin. Alright. And as usual, I believe that this is helpful with graphics or animation in particular, because my handwriting and drawing skills are not great. And so here we have right, our T traversing around the circle. Right, it's going to go forward and then back. So let's actually start over and let's talk about the sine values. Right, and so the sine values again is the is how high up or down you go. And we've seen variations of this, but let's take a look at it again. All right, as you traverse along the circle, our heights are going up and then down. Maybe zoom out a little bit, and then they're going back up again. It's going to kind of go backwards now, right? So our sine values just measure how high our position is up or down, depending on how far we've traveled it, if we traveled T units. And you can also note that the sine values are the same as the y values, right, of the dot whose xy coordinates I decided to include here. Alright, so starting over, if I take a look at cosine, alright, cosine is the same thing except it's forward and back. So we start at 1 because we're 1 unit forward, and then as we traverse, right, as we traverse, let's back it up a little bit here. It gets smaller and smaller. We can see that around here it's close to 0, and we can see that the value of the cosine is close to 0. And now we're close to -1, right? And my height here is of my cosine function is close to -1 because we're going to the left. We'll come back close to 0. Let's back this up just a little bit. There we go. We come back close to 0, and we should note that, right, again, my cosine values are my x values in this case, right? And then finally, it grows again and it heads back to 1, right? Back to the top of its arc here and back to its rightmost point, right, along the circle. So those are the sine and cosine functions for a circle, right? One just measures how far up and down you go. The other one just measures how far forward and back you go. All right. Thank you. As usual, if you have any questions, please ask them in the discussion board or send me an email, and I'll see you in the next video.